Good morning. Today is October 6th. Let's get started. I'm not sure if this is connected. Yep. All right. In the second example, AIG was very close to failure in October 2008. AIG again was the world's largest insurance company. It was a complicated company. It was a multinational financial services company with many constituent parts, including a number of global insurance companies. But part of the company called AIG Financial Products was involved in all kinds of exotic derivatives and other types of financial activities, including, as I mentioned, the credit insurance that it was selling to the owners of mortgage-backed securities. So when the mortgage-backed securities started going bad, it became evident that AIG was in big trouble, and its counterparties began demanding cash or refusing to fund AIG, and it came under tremendous pressure. In our estimation, the failure of AIG would have been basically the end. It was interacting with so many different firms. It was so interconnected with both the US and the European financial systems and global banks. We were quite concerned that if AIG went bankrupt, we would not be able to control the crisis any further. Now, fortunately, from the perspective of lender of last resort theory, although AIG was taking a lot of losses in its financial products division, underlying those losses was the world's largest insurance company. So AIG had lots and lots of perfectly good assets. Therefore, it had collateral that it could offer to the Fed to allow us to make a loan to provide the liquidity it needed to stay afloat. And so to prevent the collapse of AIG, we used AIG assets as collateral and loaned AIG $85 billion. Later, the Treasury provided additional assistance to keep AIG afloat. That was highly controversial. The action was legitimate, we thought, first in terms of lenders of last resort theory, because it was a collateralized loan, and the Fed has in fact been fully paid back. And second, because AIG was a critical element in the global financial system. Over time, AIG stabilized. It has repaid the Fed with interest. The Treasury still owns a majority of its stock, but AIG has been paying back the Treasury as well. I would like to emphasize that what we had to do with Bear Stearns and AIG is obviously not a recipe for future crisis management. First, it was a very difficult and, in many ways, distasteful intervention that we had to do to prevent the system from collapsing. But clearly, there is something fundamentally wrong with a system in which some companies are too big to fail. If a company is so big that it knows that it is going to get bailed out, that is not at all fair to other companies. But even beyond that, too big to fail gives these big companies an incentive to take excessive risks, where they will say, well, we will take big risks. As I win, tails I lose. If the risks pay off, we make plenty of money. And if they don't pay off, the government will save us. That is a situation that we cannot tolerate. So the problem we had in September 2008 was we really did not have any legal tools or policy tools that allowed us to let Bear Stearns and AIG and the other firms go bankrupt in a way that would not cause incredible damage to the rest of the system. And therefore, we chose the lesser of two evils, two evils, and therefore we chose the lesser of two evils and prevented AIG from failing. The lesser of two evils. That being said, we want to be sure that this never happens again. We want to be sure that the system is changed so that if a large systemically critical firm like AIG comes under this kind of pressure in the future, there will be a safe way to let it fail so that it can fail and the consequences of its mistakes can be borne by its management and shareholders and creditors without bringing down the whole financial system. Finally, let me say a few words about the consequences of the crisis. We did stop the meltdown. We avoided what would have been, I think, a collapse of the global financial system. That was obviously a good thing, but one thing that I was always sure, and the Federal Reserve was always sure of, was that a collapse of some of these big financial firms was going to have very serious collateral consequences. There were people arguing even as late as September 2008, well, why don't you just let the firms collapse? There is a system that can take care of it, bankruptcy. Why don't you let them fail? We never thought that was a good option, particularly if the whole system had collapsed. We would have had extraordinary serious consequences. As it was, even though we prevented a total meltdown, there were still very serious collateral impacts, not just on the US economy, but on the global economy as well. So, following the crisis, even though the crisis was brought under control, the US economy and much of global economy went into a sharp recession. US GDP fell by more than 5%, which is quite a deep recession. 8.5 million people lost their jobs and unemployment rose to 10%. And as I said, this was not just a US situation. The US recession was, in fact, a larger average recession. Many countries around the world had worse declines, particularly those dependent on international trade. So it was a global slowdown. And as all this was happening, fears of another Great Depression were very real. Nevertheless, the Great Depression was much worse than the recent recession, and I think the view is increasingly gaining acceptance that without the forceful policy response that stabilized the financial system in 2008 and early 2009, we could have had a much worse outcome in the economy. I will close with a couple of indicators to compare the recent recession with the Great Depression. First, figure 28 shows the stock market. The darker line starts in August 1929, which was the peak of the stock market before the Great Depression. The light line shows the more recent stock prices starting in October 2007. And then each of the graphs shows you each of the graphs shows you the evolution of stock prices in the depression period and the more recent period. What is striking is that for the first 15 or 16 months, stock prices in the United States behave in this crisis very much as they did in 2029 and 2029 is the future, 1929 and 1930. But about 15 or 16 months into the recent crisis in early 2009, about the time that the financial crisis was stabilizing, look what happened. In the Depression era, stock prices kept falling, and as I mentioned, in the end, stock prices lost 85% of their value. In the recent crisis, by contrast, US stock prices recovered and began a long recovery, and they now are more than double where they were 3 years ago. Figure 29 shows. Right, that's it for today.